This is about to get a lot bigger than people realize. As Blake Lively heads toward trial, a brand new expert report is now claiming there was a massive smear campaign, and shockingly, it centers around one viral interview that completely shifted public opinion. According to this report, the backlash wasn't organic, the outrage wasn't real, and the entire narrative was supposedly manufactured. But here's where things start to fall apart. The report repeatedly points to the Little Bump interview, suggesting it triggered an alleged retaliation campaign against Blake Lively, fueled by PR machinery, bots, and so-called fake engagement. The problem? That interview existed independently, went viral days later, and resonated with viewers for one very specific reason: what people saw on screen. Now, Justin Baldoni's legal team may use that same interview in court, not as proof of a smear campaign, but as evidence of organic public reaction. And once you look at the timing, the text messages, and the lack of any real legal evidence connecting creators to studios or PR teams, the story being pushed starts to collapse. This case isn't just about a lawsuit anymore. It's about whether public opinion can be dismissed as fake, whether viewers are being treated like bots, and whether calling something a smear narrative is enough to override what people actually witnessed. Stay with me, because once you see how this argument is built, the cracks become impossible to ignore. At the center of this new phase of the case is a lengthy expert report that claims Blake Lively was the victim of an organized smear campaign. The expert behind it, Aaron Kafala, positions himself as a specialist in reputation attacks and retaliation narratives. His conclusion is blunt. The backlash against Blake Lively was not organic, but the result of a coordinated PR strategy designed to damage her image. According to the report, the turning point was a single viral interview, specifically the Little Bump interview, which allegedly triggered a wave of negative commentary. The expert argues that this moment marked the beginning of an organized retaliation campaign, claiming that reactions were artificially amplified through PR machinery, selective media pickup, and even bots. In his framing, viewers didn't simply react to what they saw, they were influenced to respond in a specific way. But here's where the logic immediately starts to strain. The report leans heavily on assumptions rather than legal evidence. It highlights patterns like spikes in comments, repeated use of the word bully, and delayed virality as proof that reactions were unorganic. Yet it never establishes a direct connection between the interviewer, any Wayfarer parties, Sony, or Justin Baldoni's team. In fact, court papers from both sides have acknowledged there was no contact between the interviewer and any involved parties. What's striking is how central the Little Bump interview becomes to the expert's argument. The report references it repeatedly, almost treating it as the smoking gun. But the more it relies on that interview, the more fragile the claim becomes. If this was truly a coordinated smear, how could it hinge on a video that no one allegedly knew existed before it was published? The expert's theory also implies something more troubling, that public opinion itself is unreliable, that viewers are incapable of watching an interview, forming their own judgment, and reacting honestly. Instead, the report suggests that negative reactions must have been engineered because spontaneous criticism doesn't fit the narrative. Rather than proving a smear campaign, the report raises a different question. Is calling something a smear enough to make it one, or does the lack of hard evidence, coordination, and verified manipulation ultimately undermine the entire claim? That's the contradiction at the heart of this report, and it only grows as more details emerge. To understand why this smear campaign theory struggles to hold up, you have to look closely at what actually happened after the Little Bump interview was published. One of the key claims in the expert report is that the interview didn't go viral naturally, that its reach was artificially pushed through PR machinery, selective sharing, and alleged bots. But the timeline tells a very different story. When the interview was first posted, it didn't explode immediately. It sat online quietly for several days. The surge in views only came later, after people genuinely started discovering it, reacting to it, and sharing it organically. That delayed virality is actually normal behavior for online content, but in the report, it's framed as suspicious. The expert suggests that because the video gained traction days later, it must have been engineered, yet there's no legal evidence showing coordination, payments, or instructions sent to amplify it. What happened next is crucial. As the interview spread, the comment section filled up quickly, not with copy-paste messages, but with varied reactions, personal observations, and emotional responses. Many viewers focused on the same moments independently, repeatedly using words like bully and mean girl. The report treats this repetition as proof of manipulation, but repetition can also happen when people are reacting to the same behavior. Even more damaging to the smear narrative are the off-platform responses. After the interview gained attention, the interviewer received hundreds of DMs, long emails, and private messages, many from women, saying they felt validated by what they saw. These reactions didn't appear publicly, weren't visible in analytics, and couldn't have been influenced by bots. Yet they directly contradict the idea of a manufactured backlash. The report also overlooks a major problem. If the reactions were fake, why did a follow-up video explaining the interview's context also go viral days later? That second wave of engagement further suggests sustained organic reaction, not a one-time PR push. By framing audience response as unorganic, the expert unintentionally makes a bold claim that viewers are incapable of thinking for themselves, and that assumption may end up weakening the argument more than any counterclaim ever could. One of the most controversial parts of the expert report is its insistence that the word bully could not have emerged organically. According to the report, the repeated use of that word in the comments section proves manipulation. But this argument ignores a critical factor: behavior. People weren't reacting to a label, they were reacting to what they watched unfold in real time during the Little Bump interview. Viewers pointed out moments that felt uncomfortable without needing any outside influence. The interviewer was repeatedly ignored, physically turned away from, and spoken over. At times, attention was redirected exclusively to Parker Posey, effectively freezing the interviewer out of her own interview. These observations weren't coordinated, they were specific, detailed, and consistent across thousands of comments. That's not how bots behave. The report frames this response as impossible unless viewers were told what to think, but that assumption strips audiences of basic judgment. Watching a social interaction and recognizing power dynamics, social exclusion, or a power play is something people do instinctively. No PR strategy is required for viewers to recognize when someone appears dismissive or controlling. Another detail the report fails to reconcile is how easily offense was taken during the interview itself. A polite pregnancy congratulation was framed as inappropriate. A standard question about costumes, a common topic in press interviews, was reinterpreted as insulting or sexist. These moments reinforced the perception of overreaction and heightened sensitivity, which viewers then commented on naturally. What's striking is that the expert doesn't dispute what happened in the interview, only how people responded to it. Instead of addressing the behavior directly, the report suggests that any negative interpretation must be the result of manipulation. In doing so, it unintentionally reframes real people as automated actors incapable of independent thought. That's where the mean girl narrative comes from, not from a smear campaign, but from pattern recognition. People saw familiar social dynamics they'd experienced themselves and reacted emotionally. And when thousands of individuals independently reach similar conclusions, repetition isn't evidence of coordination, it's evidence of shared perception. This is the point where the smear narrative starts to wobble, because if calling something a bully requires proof of manipulation, then the argument isn't about PR anymore. It's about denying the audience's ability to interpret what they saw with their own eyes. This is where the smear campaign argument begins to completely unravel. After laying out claims about bots, fake engagement, and PR machinery, the expert report never actually proves that any of it existed. Instead, it relies on implication, suggesting that because reactions were negative and widespread, they must have been manufactured. But implication is not legal evidence. The report repeatedly points to things like spikes in comments, similar language appearing across platforms, and increased media pickup as proof of coordination. Yet none of those elements demonstrate an organized retaliation campaign. Viral content naturally creates patterns. When a video resonates, people talk about the same moments, use similar words, and share it across Reddit, Instagram, and TikTok without instruction. What's missing from the report is any concrete link. No emails, no payments, no instructions, no proof of coordination between creators, studios, or PR teams. There's also no evidence of any connection between the interviewer and Wayfarer parties, Sony, or Justin Baldoni's team. In fact, court filings from both sides acknowledge that no such connection exists. The theory also collapses under its own weight when you consider timing. If this was a pre-planned smear, how did it rely so heavily on a video that allegedly no one knew would exist until it was already published? A coordinated campaign requires planning. Reacting after the fact and retroactively labeling organic backlash as manipulation isn't strategy, it's narrative damage control. Even more problematic is the assumption that people cannot react honestly to celebrity behavior. The report implies that viewers couldn't possibly watch an interview, feel discomfort, and comment accordingly unless they were nudged by unseen forces. That logic effectively turns the public into bots while accusing others of using them. The more the report tries to explain away public reaction, the more it exposes its own weakness. It treats repetition as evidence of orchestration rather than what it often is online, shared human response. Without hard proof of fake engagement, the claim of a smear campaign becomes circular. Negative reactions are labeled fake because they're negative. At this stage, the argument isn't supported by facts, it's sustained by disbelief. And in a legal setting, disbelief isn't enough. Once you move past the PR arguments and look at what actually happened during production, another major contradiction emerges, this time around creative control and the fight over the final cut. According to multiple insiders and editors involved, the battle between Blake Lively's cut and Justin Baldoni's cut didn't end the way many people assume. Early on, Blake pushed aggressively for her own version of the film, pressuring Sony into allowing a parallel edit. The cuts were repeatedly tested against each other through test screenings and audience testing, with scores tracked week after week. That process alone already challenges the later claim of a severe power imbalance, because actors typically don't receive that level of editorial access unless they have leverage. What's especially revealing is what happened over time. Multiple editors reportedly said that as Blake's cut continued to test, it only improved when it slowly reverted back toward Justin Baldoni's version. Dialogue choices, pacing, and structural elements that audiences responded poorly to were removed, while scenes closer to Justin's original edit were restored. By the time the film was released, insiders claimed the differences between the two versions were minimal. In fact, the most significant remaining change was the addition of a final montage featuring a Taylor Swift song. Outside of that musical choice, the film audiences ultimately saw was far closer to Justin's cut than Blake's original version. That raises an obvious question. If Blake's cut was truly superior, why did it need to be reshaped so heavily to resemble Justin's work? This also reframes the power dynamics narrative. Blake wasn't sidelined. She had access to editors, testing data, and studio decision-makers. She was able to push for reshoots, script changes, and extended editing time, even delaying production at points. That level of influence doesn't align with claims of being excluded from the process. Rather than exposing misconduct, the editing history suggests something else entirely, a compromise driven by data. Audience response ultimately dictated which elements stayed, and when the dust settled, the version released wasn't a victory for one side, it was a quiet acknowledgement of what worked best. When all of these pieces are put together, one underlying motivation begins to stand out, and it has less to do with interviews or PR narratives and more to do with the sequel. The fight wasn't only about reputation or control over the first film, but about what came next. It starts with us and the possibility of turning it into a long-term franchise. Multiple insiders and readers have pointed out that the sequel itself was already controversial long before any of this drama surfaced. Reviews for It Starts With Us were mixed at best, with many calling it an unnecessary sequel, a cash grab, or a story that failed to add anything meaningful. Critics highlighted copy-paste content, confusing timelines, and a rushed ending, while others said the romance between Lily and Atlas felt flat compared to the first book. That context matters. If the sequel was expected to be a major success, creative disagreements might feel justified, but if the sequel was already on shaky ground, the urgency to secure control over the narrative and over future installments takes on a different meaning. Some insiders believe this is why the conflict escalated so aggressively, why alliances were formed, and why reputations became collateral damage. From this perspective, the legal and PR strategies start to look less reactive and more preventative. Securing influence early could mean shaping how any sequel would be developed, marketed, and ultimately received. And if a franchise was the end goal, controlling perception became just as important as controlling edits. Ironically, that ambition may have backfired. Even supporters of Colleen Hoover have acknowledged that fan loyalty, not storytelling strength, carried the sequel's reputation. Many readers admitted they finished the book out of curiosity rather than enjoyment. That reality raises a sobering question: would any version of the sequel have succeeded regardless of who directed or starred in it? At this point, the controversy feels larger than one interview, one expert report, or even one lawsuit. It's about expectations colliding with reality. And if the sequel had moved forward amid all this tension, only to fail critically or commercially, it would have underscored just how misplaced the fight truly was. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't over what was lost, but over what was never guaranteed to succeed in the first place. When you strip away the labels, the reports, and the accusations, what's left is a much simpler question. Can public reaction be dismissed as fake just because it's inconvenient? This case has shown how quickly the word smear campaign can be used to explain away genuine criticism without presenting hard evidence to support it. At trial, the focus won't just be on expert opinions or legal language. It will come down to credibility, timing, and whether viewers are allowed to trust their own judgment. The viral interview, the accusations of bots, and the claims of PR machinery all rest on one assumption: that people can't think for themselves. And that assumption may be the weakest part of the entire argument. For Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and everyone else involved, this isn't only about a lawsuit anymore. It's about reputation, power, and who controls the narrative when millions of people see the same thing and reach similar conclusions. Courts can rule on legal responsibility, but they can't rewrite what audiences already witnessed. So, now I want to hear from you. Do you think this was truly a coordinated smear narrative or simply an organic reaction that spiraled out of control? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want continued updates as this case moves forward, make sure you're subscribed.